Right, very quickly, to introduce myself. So I'm Patrick Duong. I'm not Thai. I'm Vietnamese. I'm born in Morocco. I grew up in France and I studied in American university. So it gives you a little bit of my international background. I have been living in Thailand for the last 4 years. I'm based in Bangkok and I'm the regional advisor of UNDP for Asia and the Pacific. Specifically looking at local governance and SDG localization. So I'm very happy to be here this afternoon with you, and we'll share a few of our lessons that we have got from the region with you to enrich the dialogue. Before we start, I wanted to start with, before we start the presentation and the slide, with a very short, 7 minutes video that gives you an idea of what we mean by SDG localization. So to move away a little bit from the principles that we have heard this morning towards something that is more concrete, that impacts our lives and where we can contribute to make changes. So let's have a quick, I don't know if I can, thanks. It's going to be 7 minutes video. You will see there's a case of Thailand, and after that I will present a few slides to you. Thank you.
I get up in the morning. Of course, I have to do my praying time first, and then I directly open my apps application of Pasicola. And it usually the driver have already wrote in the apps of Pasicola saying, I am going to pick the children at 6:15. I could control the position of the car through the application also. So it's very effective for us to communicate each other between me and the driver and between me and other parents.
Pasicola itu bagaimana kita melakukan suatu pembangunan berkelanjutan. Di antaranya adalah bagaimana menghilangkan kemacetan, melakukan perpaduan moda transportasi yang ada. Pasicola adalah merupakan suatu inovasi yang berasal dari bawah, bottom up, yang melibatkan semua unsur. Itu berawal dari workshop yang diadakan kerjasama dengan UNDP. Kita mengundang beberapa stakeholder, kemudian merumuskan langkah-langkah apa yang harus kita buat untuk menciptakan transportasi yang dicintai di Kota Makassar.
เที่ยวที่บ้านหนองสาเราค่ะสิ่งหนึ่งที่เขาจะได้นักท่องเที่ยวจะได้มาทำมาเรียนรู้วิถีชีวิตตามฤดูกาลถ้ามาช่วงฤดูฝนจะเจอกับมาทำนามาทำกิจกรรมมาเกี่ยวพลามาทำเวิร์กช็อปทำไพ่ร้องคำด้วยตัวเองนะคะแล้วก็ถ้าสมมติว่ามาฤดูหนาวเนี่ยค่ะกิจกรรมก็จะเปลี่ยนไปมาเป็นเกี่ยวข้าวแทนมาเดินป่าบ้างย้อมผ้าคามบ้างแล้วก็กินอาหารพื้นถิ่นตามฤดูกาลประโยชน์อย่างหนึ่งก็คือนอกจากการท่องเที่ยวแล้วเนี่ยการท่องเที่ยวเป็นมากกว่าการท่องเที่ยวเป็นเครื่องมือพัฒนาคนในชุมชนได้อย่างมีประสิทธิภาพทางโครงการนะคะถึงได้มีบริษัทโลคอลออนไลน์ค่ะเข้ามาเป็นพี่เลี้ยงในการเรื่องของการทำการท่องเที่ยวให้เราค่ะทำให้เราทำการท่องเที่ยวได้อย่างมีประสิทธิภาพมากขึ้นเข้าใจการท่องเที่ยวอย่างยั่งยืนมากขึ้นการท่องเที่ยวเป็นเครื่องเชื่อมสัมพันธ์ระหว่างครอบครัวเด็กรุ่นใหม่กลับมาอยู่ที่บ้านมากขึ้นเด็กรุ่นใหม่ที่อยู่ที่บ้านหันมาสนใจการท่องเที่ยวมากขึ้น
คนที่เห็นนะมันก็ได้มีอาชีพขึ้นเสริมขึ้นมาอีกหลายคนนะคือมันหมุนเวียนอยู่ในบ้านของเราการซื้อขายคล่องตัวขึ้นการโทรผ่าปลูกเครื่องปลูกของในน้ำพืชผักเราหรือว่าการพวกอาหารการกินของเรารู้สึกว่า มันภูมิใจมันว่าได้ต่อยต่ำเลยนะมันเห็นในเขาเนี่ยอยาก ว่าอยากให้มันสูญหายไปวัฒนธรรมแบบนี้คืออาหารพื้นบ้านที่ป้าเห็นในคลิปเป็นอาหารที่พ่อแม่เลี้ยงเฮาอยากให้คนเห็น
This is a very unique experience when you come to travel another country. You get to just stay in hotels and have a fancy restaurant. Because of it, I really want to recommend my friends to come here and actually get to know the culture of Thailand. To feel the warmth from the local people, to come and see.
一种新能源汽车，它在为什么好？因为它根本不会产生任何的污染，它只会产生水，所以在这个方面对环境很好。因为我们中国有13亿人口，人口的量是非常大的。这个在实际情况当中，人口众多，对环境造成一定的压力。同时，因为中国的经济发展起来了，居民的那个用车的那个需求也很大。如果在不断的运用那个燃油车的话呢，对环境会造成更大的一个压力。我们大海区现在正在和联合国开发计划署一块推动促进中国燃料电池汽车商业化发展项目。从今年开始，我们会陆续有一些氢燃料电池汽车投入到使用当中。比如说我们今年我们大海区的计划是投入70辆那个氢燃料电池大巴，投入到正式运营到那个公交线路上面去。然后还有500辆的氢燃料电池的物流车投入到那个正常运营当中。然后，从今年到明年到往后，我们会陆续的继续增加氢燃料电池汽车的这个量，包括不同的车型、不同类型的车也会慢慢的投入到上面。
lại cái khác ở trong chứ cả có mình thay mình nhưng để ai để cứ chúng ta tụ tập ở bằng hàng ở sự thực tại của sao cho
ពាក់ព័ន្ធនឹងបញ្ហាទឹកផលចិត្តចូលនេះហើយតែយើងពាក់ព័ន្ធនឹងការចង់បានបច្ចេកទេសពាក់ព័ន្ធនឹងការងារបច្ចេកទេសពាក់ព័ន្ធជាមួយនឹងអង្គការយុវជនដែលយើងឲ្យមន្ត្រីទៅវាបច្ចេកទេសមកវិញគាត់ផ្សព្វផ្សាយដល់ប្រជាពលរដ្ឋឲ្យចេះពីវិធីសាស្ត្រប្រើប្រាស់ដីការគ្រប់គ្រងការផលិតកម្មដំណាំដំឡូងមីនេះ
ការពីមុនខ្ញុំតែការពីជាភាពពាក្យចាស់កូនពីអ្នករៀនបានចោលអីតែឥឡូវខ្ញុំអាចមានថវិកាដល់ឲ្យកូនស្រី2នាក់រៀនអត់ចប់អញ្ចឹងពីការកូនដល់កូនរៀនហើយជាគ្រួសារក៏មានការបន្តជាងមុនថាអ្វីជាផ្លាស់ប្ដូរដើម្បីថាប៉ុណ្ណឹងក៏បានឬឡើងជាងនឹងក៏បានចាហើយចង់ឲ្យកសិករទាំងអស់ក៏មានការរីកចម្រើនឲ្យគេកសិករចិត្តក្រអ្នកមានចិត្តតែមានចឹងចង់
Right, so with this little video, what I wanted to do is to somehow demystify what we mean by SDG localization. To give you a concrete example of some of the activities that are implemented in this region. And to really tell you that localizing the SDGs is about addressing the needs of the people in a specific context. But so you see, there were different examples. But at the heart of all these 4 examples, you will see, and this is what I will present in my slides, there are 4 essential enablers that cuts across always all these interventions, and that whether you're in this room as a central government representative, local government, CSO, academia, or just individuals, we all have a role to play. And my message to you today is that the SDG gives us an opportunity to rethink how we want our cities, our villages, our country to develop so that it's more sustainable and that it's really also looking at the future and preserving the resource of the country and of course the resource of the planet. Now, so let's move. What I want to emphasize first is we all know, if we look at the macro level, that this region, and ASEAN in particular, is doing very well. There's economic growth, and the level of poverty, and this morning Dale, my colleague, was mentioning the 1.9 kind of threshold for poverty. Well, clearly it has reduced from, I need to look at the figures here, 48.8% in 90, down to 7.2 in 2013. So, at the macro level, things are good. What I also want to show to you here is that despite that very interesting, encouraging, and stable growth of our countries, the sustainable development remains extremely fragile. And if you look at some national governments, cities, provinces, and villages, we all face different challenges, right? Challenges in terms of climate and disasters, challenges in terms of urbanization and migrations, fiscal risk, financial risk, and also social cohesions, right? And this is something that we all know. But what is more important is that despite the growth of our countries in Asia, what you have is that the Gini coefficient, in fact, the coefficient of inequality between the rich and the poor is increasing. And as you know, Thailand, unfortunately, has the highest Gini coefficient. So the inequalities is something that we need to look at, right? So the difference between the poor and the rich is extremely important. Now, why do we need to localize the SDGs? And here basically 3 or 4 points. First of all, because at the country level, you still have pockets of poverty, right? So development is not equally spread across the country. We all know that. But also because local development strategies need to take into account the specific socio-cultural, economical, and religious context of the different localities, right? You cannot have a one-size-fits-all in terms of local development. The other issue that we have, of course, is that we need, this is the difference that was mentioned this morning between the MDGs and the SDGs. The SDGs motto, goal, is to leave no one behind. But to leave no one behind requires a new set of ways of doing things, whether, again, you are the government, the local government, the academia, the private sector, or an individual. This is what we call a whole of society approach, and we should not just say, oh, the SDGs are the responsibility of my government, let's do it, I'm there and I'm passive. No, the SDGs requires that there's an engagement of all of us as individuals. And this is what I mean here by a whole of society approach to partner, to find new solutions, to engage, to use circular economy, to use the sufficiency economy philosophy and so forth, so that we do things a little bit differently. So the focus is really about leaving no one behind. Now, who are those that leave behind? Well, as this morning my colleague Dil was saying, the whole majority of Asian people live above the 1.9 poverty rate. And if I'm not mistaken, it's at 7.2 live below in the case of Thailand, right? So what I'm saying here, the green is the 100%, it's the total population. What we need to look at is that little bubble here in gray, that those that live below 1.9, but not only those people, also those that are affected by poverty, that are not counted in the 1.9, those that do not have access to education, to basic health care, or those people that are marginalized. For instance, a disabled group need to have a special attention. And that's what also when we do SDGs at the city level or at the village level, we need to look at. Whether those people, those disabled people are rich or not, they are part of groups that need our attention. So this is what we mean by leaving no one behind. Now, I use this chart because I quite like it, and you don't need to look at all these little dots. The dots there are countries, and you will search for Thailand, you will not find it. But what I'm saying here is, it's about education budget. So, the more you spend public fund at the national level, at the sub-national level, meaning the more you decentralize finance for local government to be able to respond to education needs, the higher your enrollment rate and your literacy rate goes. Right? So the more money you spend at the local level, and that you give that to the local people, the higher the indicators of education or health goes up. So, what do we mean by SDG localization? Again, even within the UN we're not very clear, but we need to come up with some kind of a common understanding. The way I see it, it's at the country level, it's everything that goes from the central government, for example, the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Planning, or Ministry of Finance, doing policy work to localize. For example, in Indonesia, the president himself has passed a decree that basically makes it compulsory for all sub-national government to localize the SDGs. So it's a decree, it's a piece of law. So that's what I call policy work, upstream policy work. It goes down to the districts and the cities in terms of planning and budgeting. And it also concerns you and I when we go down and we clean a river with a private sector, for instance. So that's the whole spectrum of what we mean by SDG localization. Now, with this, of course, we need to find out some common denominator because this doesn't say much. Again, here, maybe just very quickly, these are some of the steps that we have found in this region very important when you look at localizing the SDGs, whether you sit at a provincial level, at a district, at municipality, sub-district, and so forth. First thing is really about raising awareness of the government, but also the people and the private sector. If you don't understand why it's important, why would you do it? So really it's about raising awareness and training. The other thing is very much about what we call institutional arrangements and the whole policy coherence. Again, localizing the SDG does not mean that a district or a city will do everything just by itself. It needs to look at how central governments and provinces articulate all this, right? So you don't do things just by yourself, you do it in support of a national context and a national framework. Then of course the prioritization, the data, the planning, the implementation and so forth. Let me skip this for the moment. Now, what I want to tell you here also is that when we were talking about the MDGs, we were all looking at the role of government, and it was very much in silo. So Ministry of Education needed to deliver education, Ministry of Health needed to deliver health. The message, and then we were pumping money to the Ministry of Health, so that education, so that they will build schools, they recruit teachers, they provide textbook to kids, and somehow we were expecting that this will improve the education standards and the education enrollment. But it turned out that yes, it has, but it has not really fulfilled the full kind of expectation that we have. What we see here is that all the SDGs are interconnected. And I'm taking this example of this little girl in Cambodia. She did not have access to education because she lived in a remote area in Cambodia. Now, for her to go to school, there were 13 institutions, not just Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Social Welfare, Ministry of Transport because she needs a road to be able to walk through, Ministry of Security because she needs security to be able to, to walk in a safe environment, and so forth, to be able to get enrolled at a school. So what you see is you cannot only think of development from a vertical perspective, you need to think development from an interconnected perspective, right? So that is something that is very important. So the SDGs are interrelated and they are complex. Here maybe I'll skip this. This is very specific to SDG 16. I'll be happy to follow up with you if you have questions. But it basically shows that, you know, when you're trying to address justice, again, these are the different sectors that one needs to look at to be able to have better equitable institutions. Now, here are three of the local governance challenges that we have seen in this region that impact the localization of the SDGs. Again, I mean, they are not specific to Thailand, but somehow I think you will recognize that there are similarities. First is what I have called the unfinished decentralization and local governance reform. Yes, we have political decentralization, there are elections, but the functions are not always delegated from central to province or province to district, from district to sub-districts, right? So again here, there's something missing. And same when you look at the resources. Very often the resources go down but stop at a certain level, and the below level don't get the right level of resource that they need to be able to conduct local development, right? So there's an issue here in terms of unfinished reforms. Also, let's be honest among ourselves, a lot of the planning process, and this is why, you know, I was very happy when I heard the gentleman this morning explain his work and the way he engages with citizens, because in many cases, the whole planning process is driven by central government. And again, if it's driven by central government, I have nothing against it. I'm a lawyer by training, so, you know, I like everything that is very vertically. But on the other hand, if you want to respond to local needs, you need to be able to listen and be close to the people you are serving, right? Then there's also an issue that cuts across in Asia, way less in Africa where I used to work before, is the whole demand of citizens for accountability, for services, for participation. In Asia, the sphere between public and private is somehow very separate, right? So people are not always used to ask their government to account, and this is something that is important. When I mean Asia, I'm thinking more of this part of Asia, Southeast Asia. So weak demand from citizens, and also very weak or even lack of interest of the private sector to contribute to local development and to what we call greening the private sector. That is something that is very weak. Another issue that we that comes across is data. There's not enough data. How do you want to leave no one behind? I mean, how do you want to reach to those persons if you don't know who they are, right? So if national statistics stops at central level or at a provincial level, how are you going to get indicators on who needs what and where they are? And this is why, I mean, the work that you do with MIPS is so interesting, because I really think that granular level is extremely important, and the UNICEF College will discuss this in a minute. But you need data, and I will say you need data that goes beyond national statistics, because again, maybe not here, but in many countries, you know, the national statistics, I mean, I would not always think they're 100% reliable. So how do you use other sources of data? From academia, from NGOs, from different organizations, from what we now call big data, to be able to find out where the needs and who are those people that need to be serviced and looked after. Okay, so again, this one I'm going to skip very quickly. It tells you a little bit of what some of the issues that local government face. So lack of resources, most of the budget is spent on salaries. So of course, if you spend all your budget on salaries, how can you build schools, or how can you do agricultural extension, right? There's lack of understanding. Also, something very important is that there are unclear functions. We don't know as local government what we need to do versus what the province needs to do, and so forth. So you need to unpack that. This is what we call in our jargon functional assignments. Now, is it complexity or is it confusion? Well, if you tell me that it's confusion, I would agree. But what I'm trying to do here is to convince you that there's a little bit of a light in this confusion. So, again, there are different development contexts, right? In Thailand, but also across Asia countries. context. You have rural context, peri-urban context, and the city and the urban context. And for each of these development contexts, you have a different set of SDG localization approach. So in a rural area, clearly you would look, and this is a very good example from China, where they lifted poverty in the rural context by really empowering and giving resource for the farmers to grow, to have access to education, to have access to finance, and to be able to improve his or her productivity. So the focus was not about, building roads or whatever. It was really about focusing on the poor farmer and making he or she grow and get more revenues at the end of the day. That was the focus, and honestly, China did pretty well. Now, if you're in a peri-urban, what you're looking at when you're localizing the SDGs is more the socio-economic inequalities, because in peri-urban you have already that inequality between the rich and those that are less. So you're looking at providing better services, better access to basic service, okay, that we've mentioned also when we heard this morning. You're also looking at attracting the private sector. A lot of the companies, the industries, they are in the peri-urban areas, right? They're not in the cities. The big factories are in peri-urban. They pollute, right? You want to try to regulate that. They also recruit because they need labor force. So what you try to do there is two things. You try to convince them that their labor standards are better, SDG 16 and so forth. But you also try to somehow, I don't know how you do that, but that's the beauty of being an advisor. But what you also try to do is you try to encourage them to invest in the training, in this education and so forth, so that they have the better quality of workers and so forth, okay? And then if you're in an urban setting, and I always take the example of Singapore, well, then you look into smart technologies and so forth, okay? So let's not spend too much time here. Now, where to start when we see the complexity of what it means to localize the SDGs, and what can we do? Well, the first thing is we should think of doing things differently. And again, what I'm saying here, and I'm looking at you because you're government representative, local, central, citizen, private sector, and so forth, and individuals, is to do things differently. Individually, we can make those changes. And what it means is that, first of all, central and local is important. I'm not saying that local needs to go all by itself. No, central to local coordination is key. You need to look at things differently, and you need to innovate. You need to try to address a problem not from a vertical perspective. So I want to train, I want to improve education, so I build a school, I recruit a teacher, I give a book. No, that doesn't work anymore. To get to education, you need to build schools, you need to have roads, you need to have families, have the socio-cultural norms that allow them to send their children to school and the girls to school, right? So if you need to address those issues, that's how you will bring a girl to school. It's not by building a school, it's by convincing the parents that they need to give their girl access to education. I'm doing half of the work of UNICEF here, by the way. Okay, so, and then you have to have what we call platforms to allow collaboration to happen. Again, these are big words, but you see, when you apply that to local context, it's quite easy. Now, this is what we call in UNDP the 4+1 enablers, and this is what I was mentioning to you when I showed you this video just now. Different stories, totally different issues, but at the heart of it, these 4+1 enablers. The first enabler is, and I've mentioned that, the policy coherence. You're at the local level, you have to look at what the national government is telling you to do, and you need to look at that space. That is very clear in terms of planning, budgeting, accountability, data, and so forth. The second thing you need to look at, it's really the data. You need to have data, disaggregated data, beyond national statistics. You also need to look at multi-stakeholder partnership. Again, the role of central government or the role of local government is not enough. When you're localizing the SDGs, you as government have a role, but the private sector, the citizens, the NGO, and the academia also have a role to play. So how do you build partnerships with them? And then you need to look at financing. And about financing, we tend to think that, well, it's a national budget allocation. It's what we call the intergovernmental fiscal transfer. No, it's not just that. It's also how do you bring the private sector to invest with you. The first video that you saw about those buses that were bringing kids to school is a private sector function. It used to be conducted in Makassar in Indonesia by the local government with their own tax money. But then they basically engage with the private sector and they manage to come up with a service that costs less and that is equally efficient or even more. So at the heart of all these four, you have one that is very important. It's about innovation. And innovation is not about smartphones and technology. It's also about how you connect to people. It's what we call the social innovation. How do you engage with citizens? How do you listen to their needs so that you are developing services that respond to them, right? So the social innovation is very, very important. And this is why, again, I wanted to show you this video on the first one on the bus because it's all about social innovation. So, I almost finished. So, to be able to connect those 4+1 enablers, what we do in UNDP, and then I'll be happy to answer questions later on, we're trying to develop these kinds of partnerships. So, the first thing is we recognize that we need to have central government, the academia, the UN and the development partner, including the NGOs and all the others, the private sector, the citizens, and the local government. So these are the the 6 key partners when you localize. So what you want to do is connect them. That's the first plan, right? You want to connect so that they share experience, they share resources, they work with you, they co-design solutions. They all bring their sets of their own expertise. So you're connecting those expertise, right? So you're not working in silo anymore. And this is very important for local government, right? You're not, because you're sitting on education, you're looking across and you're trying to engage with whoever is able to help you. And what we do in UNDP is we create that platform, that space for that to happen. Now, if you think like this, you say, well, Patrick is really saying, you know, it's too up there in the air and it doesn't make sense. But think of an issue. Think of, for example, public transport, right? So public transport, if you use that, you connect central government, Ministry of Transport with the academia because they are thinking in terms of, you know, development of solutions, engineering, road construction and so forth. You work with the development partners and the NGOs, you engage with the private sector, so, you know, they put private buses or they build, you know, I don't know, MTRs or whatever. You engage with the citizens so that they define where they want those transport issues to be solved. You work with local government. So that is the collaborative thing that allows you to address issues not in a singular and vertical way, but in a comprehensive and holistic way. So, I'm finished. These are just quick examples. Santi is looking at me because I'm spending all the time. So I'll leave it here and I will be very happy to answer your questions over the next, until tomorrow. Thank you very much.